On August 6, 1945, the U.S. Army Air Forces detonated a uranium gun-style fission bomb nicknamed Little Boy over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, on August 9th, the U.S. Army Air Forces detonated a plutonium implosion-type fission bomb, codenamed Fat Man, over the Japanese city of Nagasaki. The bombings resulted in the deaths of approximately 200,000 civilians and military personnel from acute injuries sustained from the explosions. Since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear weapons have been detonated on over 2,000 occasions for the purposes of testing and demonstration. Only a few nations possess such weapons or are suspected of seeking them. The only countries known to have detonated nuclear weapons and acknowledging possessing them are the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, the People's Republic of China, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. Israel is also believed to possess nuclear weapons, though in a policy of deliberate ambiguity, it does not acknowledge having them. Germany, Italy, Turkey, Belgium, and the Netherlands are nuclear weapons sharing states. South Africa is the only country to have independently developed and then renounced and dismantled its nuclear weapons. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons aimed to reduce the spread of nuclear weapons, but its effectiveness has been questioned and political tensions remain high. Modernization of nuclear weapons continues to occur. Since the advent of nuclear weapons and power, the use of fission in both weapons and power plants has grown since 1945. Nuclear power is now used in 449 reactors in 31 countries. Electricity was generated by a nuclear reactor for the first time ever on September 3, 1948, at the X-10 graphite reactor in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the United States, which was the first nuclear power station to power a light bulb. The second larger experiment occurred on December 20, 1951, at the EBRI Experimental Station in Idaho in the United States. On June 27, 1954, the world's first nuclear power station to generate electricity for a power grid started operations at the Soviet city of Obninsk. The world's first full-scale power station, Calder Hall in England, opened on October 17, 1956. The world's first full-scale power station solely devoted to electricity production, the Shippingport Power Plant in the United States, connected to the grid on December the 18th of 1957. Multiple and unexpected failures are built into society's complex and tightly coupled nuclear reactor systems. Such accidents are unavoidable and cannot be designed around. An interdisciplinary team from MIT has estimated that given the expected growth of nuclear power from 2005 to 2055, at least 4 serious nuclear accidents would be expected in that period. To date, there have been 5 serious accidents in the world since 1970. One at 3 Mile Island in 1979, one at Chernobyl in 1986, and 3 at Fukushima in 2011, corresponding to the beginning of the operation of Generation 2 reactors. This leads to an average of 1 serious accident happening every 8 years worldwide. Most reactors require continuous temperature control to prevent a core meltdown, which has occurred on a few occasions through accident or natural disaster, releasing radiation and making the surrounding area uninhabitable. Plants must be defended against theft of nuclear material, for example, to make a dirty bomb and attack by enemy military. The nuclear power debate is about the controversy which has surrounded the deployment and use of nuclear fission reactors to generate electricity from nuclear fuel for civilian purposes. The debate about nuclear power peaked during the 1970s and 1980s, when it reached an intensity unprecedented in the history of technology controversies. Proponents argue that nuclear power is a sustainable energy source which reduces carbon emissions and can increase energy security if its use supplements a dependence on imported fuels. Proponents advance the notion that nuclear power produces virtually no air pollution, in contrast to the chief viable alternative of fossil fuels. Proponents also believe that nuclear power is the only viable course to achieve energy independence for most Western countries. They emphasize that the risks of storing waste are small and can be further reduced by using the latest technology in newer reactors, and the operational safety record in the Western world is excellent when compared to the other major kinds of power plants. Opponents say that nuclear power poses many threats to people and the environment, and that costs do not justify benefits. Threats include health risks and environmental damage from uranium mining, processing, and transport, the risk of nuclear weapons proliferation or sabotage, and the unsolved problem of radioactive nuclear waste. Another environmental issue is discharge of hot water into the sea. The hot water modifies the environmental conditions for marine flora and fauna. They also contend that reactors themselves are enormously complex machines where many things can go wrong, and there have been many serious nuclear accidents. Critics do not believe that these risks can be reduced through new technology. They argue that when all the energy-intensive stages of the nuclear fuel chain are considered, from uranium mining to nuclear decommissioning, nuclear power is not a low-carbon electricity source. Those countries that do not contain uranium mines cannot achieve energy independence through existing nuclear power technologies. Actual construction costs often exceed estimates, and spent fuel management costs do not have a clear time limit. In 2013, China had 32 nuclear reactors under construction, the highest number in the world. By 2025, Southeast Asia nations plan to have a total of 29 nuclear power stations. Indonesia will have 4 nuclear power stations, Malaysia 4, Thailand 5, and Vietnam 16, from nothing at all in 2011. The proliferation of nuclear power and weapons is growing and will continue to grow through our lifetimes. Nuclear accidents and even intentional bombings will occur. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. March the 11th, 2011, the Tohoku earthquake hits, creating a tsunami that slams into Fukushima, Japan. Immediately after the earthquake, the active reactors automatically shut down their sustained fission reactions. However, the tsunami disabled the emergency generators that would have provided power to control and operate the pumps necessary to cool the reactors. The insufficient cooling led to 3 nuclear meltdowns, hydrogen air chemical explosions, and the release of radioactive material in Units 1, 2, and 3 from the 12th of March to the 15th. Loss of cooling also caused the pool for stored spent fuel from Reactor 4 to overheat on the 15th of March due to the decay heat from the fuel rods. The Fukushima disaster was the most significant nuclear incident since the April 1986 Chernobyl disaster, and the second disaster to be given the Level 7 event classification of the International Nuclear Event Scale. Though there has been no fatalities linked to radiation due to the accident, the eventual number of cancer deaths, according to the linear no-threshold theory of radiation safety, that will be caused by the accident is expected to conservatively be around 640 or more people in the years and decades ahead. However, an estimated 1,600 deaths are believed to have occurred due to the resultant evacuation conditions. There were no clear plans for decommissioning the plant, but the plant management estimate is 30 to 40 years. A frozen soil barrier has been constructed in an attempt to prevent further contamination of seeping groundwater. But in July of 2016, TEPCO revealed that the ice wall had failed to stop groundwater from flowing in and mixing with highly radioactive water inside the wrecked reactor building, adding that they are technically incapable of blocking off groundwater from the frozen wall. In 2007, TEPCO set up a department to supervise its nuclear facilities. Until June 2011, its chairman was the Fukushima Daiichi chief. A 2008 in-house study identified an immediate need to better protect the facility from flooding by seawater. This study mentioned the possibility of tsunami waves up to 33 feet. Headquarters officials insisted that such a risk was unrealistic and did not take the prediction seriously. The earthquake and tsunami damaged or destroyed more than 1 million buildings, leading to a total of 470,000 people needing evacuation. Of the 470,000, the nuclear accident was responsible for 154,000 being evacuated. The area remains devastated to this day. On the 10th of September of 2015, floodwaters driven by Typhoon Itsu prompted mass evacuations in Japan and overwhelmed the drainage pumps of the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant. A TEPCO spokesperson said that hundreds of metric tons of radioactive water had entered the ocean as a result. Plastic bags filled with contaminated soil and grass was also swept away by the flood waters. Though government monitoring stations assure that readings along the United States West Coast show no rising levels of radioactivity, independent sources continue to warn of affected marine life and water contamination. The effects of this single nuclear disaster may not be fully known and appreciated until many years have passed. March 28, 1979, Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. It began as any other day. However, in the nighttime hours preceding the 3 Mile Island nuclear meltdown, the plant was running at 97% of full power. The initial cause of the accident happened 11 hours earlier during an attempt by operators to fix a blockage in one of the 8 condensate polishers, the sophisticated filters cleaning the secondary loop water. These filters are designed to stop minerals and impurities in the water from accumulating in the steam generators and increasing corrosion rates in the secondary side. Blockages are common with resin filters and are usually fixed easily, but in this case, the usual method of forcing the stuck resin out with compressed air did not succeed. When they forced the resin out, a small amount of water pushed its way past a stuck-open check valve and found its way into an instrument air line. This would eventually cause the feed water pumps, condensate booster pumps, and condensate pumps to turn off around 4 a.m., which would in turn cause a turbine trip. The meltdown began with failures in the non-nuclear secondary system, followed by a stuck-open pilot-operated relief valve in the primary system, which allowed large amounts of nuclear reactor coolant to escape. The mechanical failures were compounded by the initial failure of plant operators to recognize the situation as a loss of coolant accident due to an inadequate training and human factors such as human-computer interaction design oversights relating to ambiguous control room indicators in the power plant's user interface. In particular, a hidden indicator light led to an operator manually overriding the automatic emergency cooling system of the reactor because the operator mistakenly believed that there was too much coolant water present in the reactor and caused the steam pressure release. A series of events led to a meltdown. It was the most significant accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power plant history. The incident was rated a 5 on the 7-point International Nuclear Event Scale, accident with wider consequences. The accident crystallized anti-nuclear safety concerns among activists and the general public, resulting in new regulations for the nuclear industry, and has been cited as a contributor to the decline of a new reactor construction program that had already begun in the 1970s. The partial meltdown resulted in the release of radioactive gases and radioactive iodine into the environment. Worries were expressed by anti-nuclear movement activists. Cleanup started in August of 1979 and officially ended in December of 1993, with a total cleanup cost of about $1 billion. Critical human factors and user interface engineering problems were revealed in the investigation of the reactor control system's user interface. Despite the valve being stuck open, a light on the control panel ostensibly identified that the valve was closed. In fact, the light did not indicate the position of the valve, only the status of the solenoid being powered or not, thus giving false evidence of a closed valve. As a result, the operators did not correctly diagnose the problem for several hours. The operators had not been trained to understand the ambiguous nature of the pilot-operated relief valve indicator and to look for alternative confirmation that the main relief valve was closed. There was a temperature indicator downstream of the pilot-operated relief valve that could have told them the valve was stuck open. This temperature indicator, however, was not part of the safety-grade suite of indicators designed to be used after an incident, and the operators had not been trained to use it. Its location on the back of a 7-foot-tall instrument panel also meant that it was effectively out of sight of the operators. Human error and one simple faulty valve almost caused the worst nuclear accident in human history. A peer-reviewed research article by Dr. Stephen Wing found a significant increase in cancers from 1979 to 1985 among people who lived within 10 miles of 3 Mile Island. It could have been much worse, and this was not the only time a meltdown occurred. April 26, 1986, a catastrophic nuclear accident occurred in the Soviet Union at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. During a late-night safety test which simulated power failure and in which safety systems were deliberately turned off, a combination of inherent reactor design flaws, together with the reactor operators arranging the core in a manner contrary to the checklist for the test, resulted in an uncontrolled reaction condition that flashed water into steam, generating a destructive steam implosion and a subsequent open-air graphite fire. This fire produced considerable updrafts for about 9 days that lofted plumes of fission products into the atmosphere, with the estimated radioactive inventory that was released during this very hot fire phase approximately equal in magnitude to the airborne fission products released in the initial destructive explosion. Practically all of this radioactive material would then go on to fall out, precipitate onto much of the surface of the western USSR and Europe. The Chernobyl accident dominates the energy accidents subcategory of most disastrous nuclear power plant accidents in history, both in terms of cost and casualties. It is one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents classified as Level 7, the maximum classification on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the other being the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan in 2011. The struggle to safeguard against scenarios which have the potential for greater catastrophe and the later decontamination efforts of the surroundings ultimately involved over 500,000 workers and cost an estimated 18 billion rubles. During the accident, blast effects caused 2 deaths within the facility, and later 29 firemen and employees died in the days to months afterward from acute radiation syndrome, with the potential for long-term cancers still being investigated. 31 deaths are directly attributed to the accident, all among the reactor staff and emergency workers. A Soviet report placed the total confirmed deaths from radiation at 64 as of 2008. The Chernobyl Forum predicts the eventual death toll could reach 4,000 among those exposed to the highest levels of radiation. 200,000 emergency workers, 116,000 evacuees, 270,000 residents of the most contaminated areas. This figure is a total causal death toll prediction, combining the deaths of approximately 50 emergency workers who died soon after the accident from acute radiation syndrome, 9 children who have died of thyroid cancer, and a future predicted total of 3,940 deaths from radiation-induced cancer and leukemia. Contrary to safety regulations, bitumen, a combustible material, had been used in the construction of the roof of the reactor building and the turbine hall. Ejected material ignited at least 5 fires on the roof of the adjacent reactor 3, which was still operating. It was imperative to put those fires out and protect the cooling system of reactor 3. Inside Reactor 3, the chief of the night shift wanted to shut the reactor down immediately, but his chief engineer would not allow it. The operators were given respirators and potassium iodine tablets and told to continue working. At 5 o'clock, the director made his own decision to shut down the reactor, leaving only those operators who had to work the emergency cooling systems, all of whom died. Radiation levels were many times stronger than any background radiation and were off the scales in areas near the meltdown. The explosion and fire threw hot particles of the nuclear fuel and also far more dangerous fission products, radioactive isotopes, and other particles into the air. The residents of the surrounding area observed the radioactive cloud on the night of the explosion. Robots sent in to clear the material stopped working because the radiation was so high it fused the electronics in the devices. Initially, the Soviet Union downplayed the incident and reported nearby people were fine and were going about their business attending a wedding and fishing. However, what was not known by the rest of the world was that evacuation efforts were already ongoing. Only on the 28th of April, after radiation levels set off alarms at Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, over 620 miles away from the Chernobyl plant, did the Soviet Union publicly admit that an accident had indeed occurred. At 9 p.m. that evening, a 20-second announcement was read on the news. It simply said, "There has been an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. One of the nuclear reactors was damaged. The effects of the accident are being remedied. Assistance has been provided for any affected people. An investigative commission has been set up." This was the entirety of the announcement of the accident. The Telegraph Agency of the Soviet Union, known as TASS, then discussed 3 Mile Island and other American nuclear accidents as an example of the common Soviet tactic of emphasizing foreign disasters when one occurred in the Soviet Union. The mention of a commission, however, let observers know the seriousness of the incident. The subsequent state radio broadcasts were replaced with classical music, which was a common method of preparing the public for an announcement of a tragedy. 400 times more reactive material was released from Chernobyl than by the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. The disaster released 1/100 to 1/1000 of the total amount of radioactivity released by nuclear weapons testing during the 1950s and 1960s. Approximately 100,000 kilometers of land was significantly contaminated with fallout, with the worst hit regions being in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Slight levels of contamination were detected all over Europe. Approximately 100,000 kilometers of land was significantly contaminated with fallout, and the worst hit regions being in the Ukraine and Russia. Slight levels of contamination were detected all over Europe. The United Kingdom was forced to restrict the movement of sheep from upland areas when radioactive material fell across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and Northern England. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster in 1986, a total of 4,225,000 sheep had their movements restricted across a total of 9,700 farms in order to prevent contaminated meat entering the human food chain. In 2005, the Chernobyl Forum report revealed thyroid cancer among children to be one of the main health impacts from the Chernobyl accident. In that publication, more than 6,000 cases were reported. According to Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union spent $18 billion on containment and decontamination, virtually bankrupting itself. The Chernobyl Forum stated that between 5% and 7% of government spending in the Ukraine is still related to Chernobyl. The area has largely reverted to forest and has been overrun by wildlife because of a lack of competition with humans for space and resources. Even today, radiation levels are so high that the workers responsible for rebuilding the sarcophagus that contains the reactor are only allowed to work 5 hours a day for 1 month before taking 15 days rest. Ukrainian officials estimated the area would not be safe for human life again for another 20,000 years, although by 2016, 187 local Ukrainians had returned and were living permanently in the zone. If the forests that have been contaminated by radioactive materials were ever to catch on fire, they will spread radioactive material further outwards in the form of smoke. To this day, Chernobyl remains a hot zone and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. Nuclear reactors are not only in jeopardy. Nuclear missiles and missile storage facilities have also had breaches and incidents that threaten the usefulness of atomic power. Many incidents delve into the strange and bizarre. On August 29, 2007, 6 AGM-129 ACM cruise missiles, each loaded with a W-81 variable yield nuclear warhead, were mistakenly loaded onto a United States Air Force B-52H heavy bomber at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota and transported to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. The nuclear warheads in the missiles were supposed to have been removed before the missiles were taken from their storage bunker. The missiles with the nuclear warheads were not reported missing and remained mounted to the aircraft at both Minot and Barksdale for 36 hours. During this period, the warheads were not protected by the various mandatory security precautions for nuclear weapons. The incident was reported to the top levels of the United States military and referred to by observers as a bent spear incident, which indicates a nuclear weapon incident that is of significant concern but does not involve the immediate threat of nuclear war. In response to the incident, the United States Department of Defense and the United States Air Force conducted an investigation, the results of which were released on the 19th of October of 2007. The investigation concluded that nuclear weapons handling standards and procedures had not been followed by numerous United States Air Force personnel involved in the incident. As a result, 4 United States Air Force commanders were relieved of their commands. Numerous other United States Air Force personnel were disciplined and decertified to perform certain types of sensitive duties, and further cruise missile transport missions from and nuclear weapons operations at Minot Air Force Base were suspended. In addition, the United States Air Force issued new nuclear weapons handling instructions and procedures. The Norwegian rocket incidents, also known as the Black Brant Scare, occurred on January the 25th of 1995, when a team of Norwegian and American scientists launched a Black Brant X-2 four-stage sounding rocket from the rocket range off the northwestern coast of Norway. The rocket, which carried scientific equipment to study the aurora borealis, flew on a high northbound trajectory, which included an air corridor that stretches from Minuteman III nuclear missile silos in North Dakota all the way to the Russian capital of Moscow. During its flight, the rocket eventually reached an altitude of 903 miles, resembling a U.S. Navy submarine-launched Trident missile. As a result, fearing a high-altitude nuclear attack that could blind Russian radar, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert, and the Nuclear Weapons Command suitcase was brought to Russian President Boris Yeltsin, who then had to decide whether to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike against the United States. The Norwegian rocket incident was a few minutes of Cold War nuclear tension that took place nearly 4 years after the end of the Cold War. While not as well known an incident as the Cuban Missile Crisis of October of 1962, the 1995 incident is considered to be one of the most severe. This incident occurred in the post-Cold War era, where many Russians were still very suspicious of the United States and NATO. In contrast, the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 had a much longer build-up. After stage separation, the rocket launch appeared on radar similar to multiple re-entry vehicles. The Russian Control Center did not immediately realize that the Norwegian scientific rocket was headed out to sea rather than towards Russia. Tracking the trajectory took 8 of the 10 minutes allotted to decide whether to launch a nuclear response to an impending attack. A Trident submarine missile from the Barents Sea could reach Russia's mainland in 10 minutes. As a result, Russian submarine commanders were ordered to go into a state of combat readiness and prepare for nuclear retaliation. The Norwegian rocket incident was the first and thus far only known incident where any nuclear weapons state had its nuclear briefcase activated and prepared for launching an attack. Another near miss for nuclear war occurred on the 26th of September of 1983. The nuclear early warning system of the Soviet Union reported the launch of multiple United States Air Force Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles from bases in the United States. These missile attack warnings were correctly identified as a false alarm by Stanislav Petrov, an officer of the Soviet Air Defense Forces. This decision is seen as having prevented a retaliatory nuclear attack based on erroneous data on the United States and its Soviet allies, which would have probably resulted in nuclear war and the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. Investigation of the satellite warning system later confirmed that the system had malfunctioned. Just weeks before, on the 1st of September of 1983, the Soviet military shot down a South Korean passenger jet, Korean Airlines Flight 007, which had strayed into Soviet airspace. All 269 people aboard the aircraft were killed, including U.S. Congressman Larry McDonald and many other Americans. Had Petrov judged this incident as a retaliatory act against the Soviets for the airline's intrusion, we may very well have had a nuclear war with Russia. Several very bizarre incidents have happened regarding nuclear missile sites in both the U.S. and Europe. Many may consider these to be fanciful. However, they did put high officials and bases on high alert. In late December 1980, there were a series of reported sightings of unexplained lights near Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England, which have become linked with claims of UFO landings. The events occurred just outside of RAF Woodbridge, which was used at the time by the United States Air Force, being the primary home for the 79th Tactical Fighter Squadron and 78th Tactical Fighter Squadron and squadrons of the 81st Fighter Wing. The base also housed nuclear weapons. The United States Air Force personnel, included Deputy Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, claimed to see things they described as a UFO sighting. The occurrence is the most famous of claimed UFO events to have happened in Britain. It has been compared to the Roswell incident in the United States and is sometimes referred to as Britain's Roswell. Around 3 a.m. on the 26th of December of 1980, a security patrol near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge saw lights apparently descending into nearby Rendlesham Forest. Servicemen initially thought it was a downed aircraft, but upon entering the forest to investigate, they saw, according to Halt's memo, what they described as a glowing object, metallic in appearance, with colored lights. As they attempted to approach the object, it appeared to move through the trees, and the animals on a nearby farm went into a frenzy. One of the servicemen, Sergeant Jim Peniston, later claimed to have encountered a craft of unknown origin while in the forest. After daybreak on the morning of the 26th of December, servicemen returned to a small clearing near the eastern edge of the forest and found 3 small impressions in a triangular pattern, as well as burn marks and broken branches on nearby trees. The Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, visited the site with several servicemen in the early hours of the 28th of December. They took radiation readings in the triangle of depressions and in the surrounding area using a standard U.S. military radiation survey meter. The radiation levels were much higher than usual. Later, according to Halt's memo, 3 star-like lights were seen in the sky, 2 to the north and 1 to the south, about 10 degrees above the horizon. Halt said that the brightest of these hovered for 2 to 3 hours and seemed to beam down a stream of light from time to time. These lights would appear and descend down to the nuclear storage areas on the base. In June of 2010, now retired Colonel Charles Halt signed a notarized affidavit in which he again summarized what had happened, then stated he believed the event to be extraterrestrial and it had been covered up by both the UK and the United States. To this day, the Rendlesham Forest incident is unexplained, but further emphasizes the need to protect nuclear storage bases and areas. There is no way to determine what the lights were, nor their interest in the nuclear base. Malmstrom Air Force Base is one of 3 U.S. Air Force bases that maintains and operates the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles. The 341st Missile Wing reports directly to 20th Air Force at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. It is part of the Global Strike Command headquartered at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Thursday morning, March the 16th of 1967, missile maintenance crews and security teams were camped out at two of the launch facilities, having performed some work during the previous day and stayed there overnight. During the early morning hours, more than one report came in from security patrols and maintenance crews that they had seen UFOs. A UFO was reported directly above one of the E-flight silos. It turned out that at least one security policeman was so affected by this encounter that he never again returned to missile security duty. It was then that missiles began going offline. Within seconds, the entire flight of 10 ICBMs was down. All of their missiles reported a no-go condition. One by one across the board, each missile had become inoperable. When the checklist procedure had been completed for each missile site, it was discovered that each of the missiles had gone off alert status due to a guidance and control system fault. Power had not been lost to the sites. The missiles simply were not operational because, for some unexplainable reason, each of their guidance and control systems had malfunctioned. 2 security alert teams were dispatched from Echo to those sites where the maintenance crews were present. The commander had not informed the strike teams that one of the on-site guards had reported a UFO. On arrival at the LF, the SAT reported back that UFOs had been hovering over each of the 2 sites by all of the maintenance and security personnel present at each site. Crews were still visibly shaken by what had occurred. The team also recalled that the maintenance crews worked on the missiles the entire day and late into the night during their shift to bring them all back on alert. Not only had missiles been lost to our deterrent forces, but they had remained out of service for an entire day. Because of this unique incident, as an ex-missileer described, all hell broke loose. Among the many calls to and from the E-flight LCC, one was to the MCC of Oscar Flight, which links to the equally dramatic story of what happened in another LCC that same morning. The Oscar Flight LCC was located a mile or two south of the town of Roy, which is about 20 miles southeast of the Echo Flight. They also reported UFOs and a bright red UFO at their gate. Simultaneously, all their Oscar Flight missiles shut down. Declassified strategic missile wing documents and interviews with ex-Boeing engineers who conducted tests following the E-flight incident investigation confirmed that no cause for the missile shutdowns was ever found. Several military activities and other engineering firms participated in the investigation, but no positive cause for the shutdowns was ever found, despite extensive and concentrated efforts. One conclusion was that the only way a pulse or noise could be sent in from outside the shielded system was through an electromagnetic pulse from an unknown source. The technology of the day made generating an EMP of sufficient magnitude to enter the shielding system a very difficult proposition, requiring large, heavy, bulky equipment. The source of the actual pulse that caused the missile shutdowns remains a mystery to this day. For many years, the Air Force has maintained that no reported UFO incident has ever affected national security. It is an established fact that a large number of Air Force personnel reported sighting UFOs at the time many of our strategic missiles became unlaunchable. These incidents clearly had national security implications. In one previously classified message, SAC headquarters described the E-flight incident as a loss of strategic alert of all 10 missiles within 10 seconds of each other for no apparent reason, and a cause for grave concern. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, says high-ranking military officials witnessed alien ships during weapons tests throughout the 1940s. Aliens came to Earth to stop a nuclear war between America and Russia, according to his bizarre claim. The NASA veteran has regularly spoken about his belief in aliens ever since he landed on the surface of the moon during the Apollo 14 mission in 1971. White Sands was a testing ground for atomic weapons, and that's what the extraterrestrials were interested in. UFOs, he says, were spotted hovering over the world's first nuclear weapons test, which took place on July the 16th of 1945 in the desolate White Sands deserts of New Mexico. Dr. Mitchell says stories from people who manned missile bases during the 20th century back up his claims. Other officers from bases on the Pacific coast apparently told him their test missiles were frequently shot down by alien spacecraft. He previously said supposedly real-life ETs were similar to the traditional image of a small-framed, large eyes and large head being. UFO believers say it's no coincidence that aliens showed up very shortly after we'd developed atomic weapons and rocket technology, as this is when they were alerted to the threat we pose to the wider cosmos. Ironically, governments have sometimes secretly promoted belief in UFOs because if someone sees a secret prototype aircraft or drone, it's much better to have it reported as a flying saucer than recognized for what it really is. NASA says that Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinions on this issue. No matter if it's aliens or some secret technology another country possesses, the security of all nuclear weapons and installations is of grave concern. Though aliens could be messing with our nuclear facilities, of greater concern is our own methods of working with nuclear materials. Human error is often responsible for issues when dealing with atomic energy. This covers nuclear power plants and all other nuclear facilities, the transportation of nuclear materials, and the use and storage of nuclear materials for medical, power, industry, and military uses. The nuclear power industry has improved the safety and performance of reactors and has proposed new and safer reactor designs. However, a perfect safety record cannot be guaranteed. Potential sources of problems include human errors and external events that have a greater impact than anticipated. The designers of reactors at Fukushima in Japan did not anticipate that a tsunami generated by an earthquake could disable the backup systems that were supposed to stabilize the reactor after the earthquake. According to UBS AG, the Fukushima 1 nuclear incidents have cast doubt on whether even an advanced economy like Japan can master nuclear safety. Catastrophic scenarios involving terrorist attacks, insider sabotage, and cyber attacks are also conceivable. Nuclear weapons safety, as well as the safety of military research involving nuclear materials, is generally handled by agencies different from those that oversee civilian safety, for various reasons, including security. There are ongoing concerns about terrorist groups acquiring nuclear bomb-making material. One relatively prevalent notion in discussions of nuclear safety is that of safety culture. The International Nuclear Safety Advisory Group defines the term as the personal dedication and accountability of all individuals engaged in any activity which has a bearing on the safety of nuclear power plants. The goal is to design systems that use human capabilities in appropriate ways, that protect systems from human frailties, and that protect humans from hazards associated with the system. At the same time, there is some evidence that operational practices are not easy to change. Operators almost never follow instructions and written procedures exactly. Many attempts to improve nuclear safety culture were compensated by people adapting to the change in an unpredicted way. Japan's Fukushima nuclear disaster is a huge wake-up call for a nuclear industry that hasn't always been sufficiently transparent about safety issues. There was complacency before Fukushima, and we cannot afford to have that complacency now. However safe a plant is designed to be, it is operated by humans who are prone to errors. Laurent Stricker, a nuclear engineer and chairman of the World Association of Nuclear Operators, says that operators must guard against complacency and avoid overconfidence. Experts say that the largest single internal factor determining the safety of a plant is the culture of security among regulators, operators, and the workforce, and creating such a culture is not easy. We live in a scary world where we are the one component that makes it terrifying. Today, Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, is considered the most volatile leader in the world. He appears to want a nuclear war and surely is intent on building a nuclear arsenal for his country. North Korea probably does possess a dozen or so nuclear bombs. However, there is no consensus whether it has acquired intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, which would enable it to strike the United States. It's estimated that North Korea will have 60 nuclear warheads by 2020. North Korea has rockets strong enough to power ICBMs, and according to the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, has nuclear warheads miniaturized enough to be delivered by ICBM. But according to the South Korean Defense Department, the ICBMs would not be able to re-enter the atmosphere intact. If North Korea has sufficient nuclear warhead miniaturization technology, its Rodong medium-range missiles could probably launch nuclear strikes as far as Japan. In December 2015, in a release from the official Korean Central News Agency, Kim announced that his country had developed a hydrogen bomb. Kim's claim is considered unlikely. Kim stated that his family turned the DPRK into a powerful nuclear weapons state ready to detonate a self-reliant A-bomb and H-bomb to reliably defend its sovereignty, and the dignity of the nation. As of 2016, the United Nations has enacted 5 cumulative rounds of sanctions against North Korea for its nuclear program and missile tests. Kim has fired missiles that could reach the U.S. military base in Guam, and through state-run propaganda, they continuously show U.S. targets as their goal. According to the North Korean government, the CIA and South Korean National Intelligence Service hired a North Korean lumberjack who worked in Russia to assassinate Kim Jong-un with a biochemical weapon that was both radioactive and nanopoisonous at the same time, and its effect would have been delayed by a few months. North Korea claims that it will seek extradition of anyone involved in the assassination attempt. As of now, North Korea is poised to use nuclear weapons regardless of any Western sanctions, and has been defiant against the Western world. Officially, the U.S. government ended its study of UFOs in 1969 because it assured the public there is no proof the phenomenon represents a threat to national security. But what if these unknown aircraft showed an interest in our nuclear weapons? A group of more than 150 military veterans, missile officers, and security personnel, including many who worked at the Nevada test site, say they have seen mystery intruders over nuclear facilities. In the darkest days of the Cold War, atomic weapons were routinely exploded above ground at the Nevada test site. It's the most nuked place on Earth. In 1955, 14 A-bombs were detonated as part of Operation Teapot, witnessed by thousands of military personnel in trenches and by thousands of test site employees. But there were other observers as well. It was what we called flying saucers. They were pretty prevalent at the test site back then, said a former test site photographer. At least a dozen former test site employees have told similar stories about unknown aircraft showing up hours or days after an atomic blast. That, in fact, UFOs have routinely monitored our nuclear weapons dating back decades, and that on occasion, apparently, they have interfered with the functionality of those weapons. In addition to the eyewitness accounts, thousands of pages of formally classified documents have been released to buttress these stories. The Department of Energy has files indicating UFO incidents over every major atomic weapons facility dating to the late 1940s, over Los Alamos National Lab, where the bombs were designed, over Hanford, where the plutonium was processed by DOE. They have records of many official sightings over what was later the Nevada test site. Researchers, however, have found plenty as well. The government ended atomic weapons tests years ago, but Nevada incidents continue. Former security officers at Area 2 at Nellis Air Force Base, for years a storage facility for up to 200 nuclear warheads, have reported multiple intrusions by unknown aircraft from the late 1990s through 2011. Civilians living near the proving grounds observe UFOs, sometimes flying in formations, and have reported them. Who's behind these incidents and why? Who knows what their motivation is? Similar incidents have been reported in the UK, India, Pakistan, and other nuclear powers. Before the advent of nuclear power and electricity, man still had plenty to fear. The idea of individuals meddling with dangerous powers that could destroy the world was not new. Wizards, witches, shamans, those with magical powers might release demons, pestilence, or any number of evils, not the least being heretical thought, like science, that would turn the world as they knew it upside down. Atomic weapons and then nuclear energy came much later and fell smoothly into this social evolution, coming to epitomize this basic struggle as it epitomizes our ability to create energy and power. The old images of alchemy came to fore, correctly so, as nuclear became the intentional transmutation sought after for so many centuries. By the time atomic energy emerged as a possibility, adults that had grown up reading by candlelight and riding horses were now reading by electric lights and riding in electric trolleys. Atomic power came to be the ultimate association with this new world and its infinite possibilities. In the end, what humans do with power, any power, has little to do with the specific source, but everything to do with the way we control ourselves and our interactions. The means that structure our society will determine our future, and energy and technology will be incorporated into these sets of means, as will any other aspect of humanity. Nuclear is no different. It will no more easily destroy the world than will coal or drug-resistant bacteria or Terminator GMO seeds. Energy sources will continue to grow and expand across the globe. How we incorporate them into any global structure will determine how well or badly we treat the planet. Renewables, low-carbon sources, efficiency, and environmental protection all need to be incorporated into means of sustainable clean energy futures in ways that provide every person with the energy to obtain what we consider a good life without provoking fear and war, all the while preserving the essential freedoms we hold dear above all things. It's a tall order indeed, but imagine a planet without fear.
We'd like to ask for your input. Share your opinion and expertise with us in the comments after watching the video. If you're a subscriber, you'll always get a heart from us as a small thank you, and we'll pin your important post to the top where everyone will read it first. Just make sure you've already subscribed, like the video, and mention both at the beginning of your comment.